Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Agents to Owners podcast. Today, from Manhattan, Kansas, owner of Copeland Insurance Agency, a self described operations specialist, a fierce advocate, Miss Vonda Copeland. Vonda, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks for being here. I'm really looking forward to getting to know you a little bit better and hearing a little bit more about your story. So yeah, just really looking forward to connecting today. Like we always do, why don't you tell us a little bit about Vonda and how you found your way into the insurance space?
Well, I married into the insurance space. My husband Jay and I are co-owners of the insurance agency, and it was actually his family that
Mm.
started it back in the 60s. And so I didn't come into it until I was a teacher in my first life. And so I didn't come into it until full time until about 2000. Jay had a very aggressive plan for expansion clear back in the 90s.
Mm.
And so he would go in and buy an office, and I would go in and help however I could. A lot of times that sometimes meant doing books at night, nights and weekends. And then till he got it big enough to where we could hire somebody to come in and do that. And then sometimes I'd end up coming back into it and doing it again until somebody else could kind of take that over. So I was kind of in and out of it. And then just because I was needing to make a change, I decided to do it full time instead of nights and weekends. So
Mm.
instead of dropping that deposit off at the bank at 10:30 at night on my way back home so I could get up to go to my other job, I just decided to be able to do that in the daylight. So, but yeah, that's how I got into it. Again, one of those people that it was never planned.
Yeah.
Which is probably 80% of the people that are in there. There's probably some statistic somewhere of, how many people never planned on getting in on insurance, but I am definitely one of those. So,
Yeah. Yeah, like most of us, I would venture to
yeah.
say it might be higher than that.
Yeah.
um I mean, just the people that I've talked to, I think I've literally maybe found two that
Mhm.
their plan was, and that was because their family was in it
Right.
or another reason. So let's talk about how your role has evolved over the last 20 years.
I think the role of operations specialist has evolved. In the very beginning, it was basically just come in and run QuickBooks. And then eventually you start seeing where we moved from QuickBooks into merging the accounting in with our management system, which when you do that, then you are integrated with the entire staff and you start, we did that in 2007 where we were actually integrated with AMS 360 with our
Mm.
accounting. So then that was really kind of the beginning of when I really started being a lot more integrated with the staff, because then we were all connected. Instead of me just taking my paperwork and I would go, sometimes I was working in a different office and I go over there and I get paperwork and I take it to my office and then I would enter stuff into QuickBooks. But when you are integrated, you're all working together. So what one person enters affects what you do and what you do affects them. And so the training, of how we were all working together changed, and the dynamics. And then it all became about processes a lot more,
Mhm.
integrated processes. I would say that, in those early 2000s, we were still really just getting the hang of creating integrated processes. And so that's to me when this whole concept of really managing the operations came about, because even today I'll have a conversation with somebody and I'll say, okay, you have to understand that I'm looking at this from a 35,000-foot view, as looking over everything, because we have 9 locations
Yeah.
and they're all probably the farthest apart from one end to the other is maybe 3 hours.
Okay.
I'm probably about 2 hours away from my farthest one from Kansas City, um, but it's not like that we're across the world, but you're enough to where you're not with them all the time. And so with these locations, you have to integrate everybody together so that you're all following the same processes
Yeah.
and procedures, but yet they're all kind of in their own little hub. And so because of that, they tend to look at things from their own little hub.
Yep.
And so, when these conversations happen, I'm like, okay, you have to understand when I look at it, I am looking down at everything and not just, what's happening in my own town. And so I think that was the whole concept of really developing processes and systems on a integrated degree. So with technology.
So did you start all those processes and create everything from the ground up?
Most of them.
Yeah.
They had TAM. They had just gone from the applied system. They had the DOS system. They were trying the TAM system. It wasn't working very well because we didn't have a lot of people on staff at the time that were very technology minded. So they were struggling with it a lot. And so eventually we went into the Vertifor systems. And we started doing a lot more training. We brought trainers in on the technology part, and we started being a lot more technology focused. And that just alone creates its own need for having the processes and procedures. So I think from that point, most of the automation and the processes for the technology and things like that were when I came in. That was kind of the things that I enjoyed because I love technology. So if I had a choice in another life, I probably would have been a coder. So
wow. Now those 9 locations, how many of those did you acquire, or did they start out with
yeah,
Copeland?
it's a mix. It's a mix of scratch locations and acquiring, I would say. And then sometimes it's hard to know because like some of our locations, we had a scratch location and then we acquired somebody in that same town and then put them together. So it's probably a half and half mix of ones that we started from scratch versus what we acquired. So
Talk about some of the challenges of those that you acquired, of kind of folding them into your process and the way that you guys do things.
We really didn't have a lot of problem with that because most of the time when we acquired somebody, we didn't have a lot of staff that we were acquiring with it.
Okay.
But that is definitely a challenge. I have one story where we did an acquisition, and that's how we got into that town. And we kept there was one staff member, and we kept that one staff member. And we put an agent in there. And then we had another girl that was spending half of her time there and half of her time in our main office. But the one that we acquired, the agent, all he did was he rearranged the furniture in his office. But because that office had been the former owner's office, the lady that we acquired, she got really upset and basically left her key at lunch and took her plant. She wasn't coming back because she was all upset. And so when we called her, she was like, well, he was rearranging all the furniture and that was, so-and-so's office. It's like, no, he's gone. He doesn't even live here anymore. That is, the new agent's office. He can arrange the furniture however he wants. And she did begrudgingly come back, but it's just amazing. That was kind of our first, that was our first experience of realizing how hard it is for them to make that change.
Yes.
So we have, when we've done that, after that, we have a lot more conversations about, this is how we're going to do this. Are there things that you have concerns about? You have that conversation more now in advance, whereas we didn't back then. Of course, that was 2002. We just kind of went in there and assumed that she would just follow our lead. And yeah, that didn't happen. So anyway, so it can be very challenging.
Yeah, that was an eye opener for me too. The reason why I asked was that then when I realized that people don't like change.
Yeah.
And I realized that my office really doesn't like change. And when I took over this agency and there was no process. And so, kind of Kathy did it this way and Susan did it this way. And, to have some uniformity, something that they were, our team wasn't comfortable with, it was a struggle at first.
Well, and you mentioned the word change. I feel like I kind of am a change agent. I've had massive change just even in my life due to some tragic events that happened where I've had to pivot. I pivot a lot. So for me, change is not scary.
Me
And
too.
it's something that I accept and I actually look for. So I really try to bring that into the staff to where, I call it triage. We look at certain situations and we're like, okay, do we need to shift some things around? Do we need to put, these people are servicing these agents? Do we need to switch this around and have this person do this? And we'll have these conversations. We meet every Wednesday at 9:00 and we have like an agenda, but sometimes the agenda is, what do we need to switch around? Because I want them to think that we're not set in stone. This doesn't have to be how it continues. I am not one of those that are like, this is how we've always done it. Don't tell me a suggestion because I don't want to hear it because I already have this set up and whatever. I am constantly going to people and saying, do you have suggestions of how we could fix this bottleneck?
Yes.
And how we could change things. And so I want them to have a constant embracing of change, to know that it's possible to change. I want them to be thinking about solutions all the time, every day.
That's right. And that's something that I have stressed to my team, is that I am constantly looking for ways to be more efficient, to do things better, to find out where the issues are, and to welcome their feedback. I don't know. They're in it every day. They see where the problem areas are. I don't.
Right.
So,
well, and I have, when I bring new people in, which I have brought in a lot of new people in the last year, my first question to them, or my first comment to them is, when they're onboarding is, remember, you have efficiencies in certain areas that I may not. And if you see something that you feel like you have a solution to, please bring it to me, because I would love to know your thoughts on it. I have a lady that she retired from many years in HR, and I don't have a background in HR, but I do the HR. And so I told her, I said, you had so much more experience on this, and I just was like, had to learn it by doing. And so I said, mine is not formal at all. And I said, coming from a family agency, we don't have, we're not corporate, we're family, we're still kind of run like a family agency. So I said, there's certain things with HR that I think we could be doing better, but I need somebody to come in and say, oh, I think this is what we could do better. And so I encourage it. I just hired an assistant who also worked in HR, and I tell her all the time, hey, I need your help in looking at this from a different standpoint, because, I know there's ways that we could be doing something better and be more efficient, whatever. So.
Yeah. Boy, that would be outstanding to have somebody like that on staff.
Yeah.
Because most of us, probably pretty much all of us, could use help in that area.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's touch on that with your staffing. We were talking a little bit about, before we started recording, about staffing, and that you've hired, a number of people over the last year. Let's touch on a little bit about what your hiring process looks like.
It kind of depends on the area. I do use headhunters and recruiters. And then I also, I do have a subscription to Ideal Traits. And so I had a lot, sometimes I would have 6 ads all at once, which was very overwhelming. I told somebody the other day, I probably have looked over, probably had over 400 applicants for different jobs in the last year, 18 months. And just to try to keep up with all that, I really feel like all I did in 2023 was the hiring process. I would say probably it was a 50-50 mix of hiring from a headhunter versus hiring from, internally, like what I did off of the ads that I was putting out. And so I did a lot of that. I was trying to recapture that team and that culture that I felt that we kind of lost during COVID. During COVID and towards the end of COVID, I would try to hire for a position And sometimes we do it by Zoom because people weren't traveling as much, especially when we're in 9 locations. Maybe I'm not in that location, so I'm trying to go by Zoom. And there were sometimes that just the quality of people, I was like, please give me strength to make this Zoom last more than 5 minutes because I just really want to hit end right now.
Yeah. Sometimes right
Yeah,
now.
it
Yeah.
was just like excruciatingly painful. And I do feel like last year there was a lot better quality candidates that were coming forward to where I actually had choices to where I could interview 3 or 4 people and then make a decision of who I wanted from that, instead of like, oh my gosh, how can I take this person and try to make them work and stuff like that. And we do have VAs. We use VAs for certain processes and things like that. But because we're still a community-based agency, we do have a lot of community activities and people that come into our offices from the communities that we have to have that face to the community. That it's just our model right now.
Yeah.
It always has been our model. It still works for us in in the areas that we're in. I know a lot. It's just everybody has different models of what works for them, and so that works for us. But that makes it very, very difficult when it comes to hiring.
Yeah.
And so the other thing was this year, I really made a move away from remote workers, which is bucking the trend a little bit.
Yeah.
And I really think that it's the right thing for our agency. I could see the culture different. It felt different. And there's just so many things that are missed when you don't have people in the same building together or even in the same room together. For instance, an example, I had walked up front and one of the CSRs was on a phone call with a client, and I could hear that conversation.
Yeah.
As could 2 or 3 other people that were, sitting nearby. And there was a question that came up that was kind of a complicated issue. And so after she hung up the phone, we started a discussion on that. And 4 of us were in this discussion about our opinions of what we needed to look like, what we thought was the correct answer and why, and where we would go to get the information to document that. And I felt like we had this big learning moment.
Yes.
And those are the things that happen when you have people in an office that don't happen when they're not there. And so I used to call it a teachable moment. And I just see so many of those, and, people helping each other and being involved with each other much more. And so I really feel like that whole remote work, there's times when it works well. And I still have 2 people that work completely remote, and I have one that works hybrid. I'm not actively looking to add to that model. I'm looking to add to people that are part of a team. Yeah. I told you earlier before we started recording, I really think that 20 or 30 years into the future, we will look back at this time and we will see that we developed people who don't develop interpersonally very well because they're not, having to sit with somebody. We're, mental illness, mental well-being. I think that's hard when some people aren't interacting with people. I just think there's going to be a lot of negatives that we see out of this trend. And I know people will not agree with me on that, but hey, I don't know if I'll be around to see that, but the younger people, mark my word, I think there will be a lot of negatives that come out of that. So.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think people will say, no, I do fine. And then there's someone, like I told you myself, it didn't work for me. And I could tell even, that nearly the 2 months that I did it, during the heart of COVID, that second month in, my production and my mind just wasn't working right. I'm like, I need to be around people. I need some white noise going on. I need something. This just isn't it. So it didn't work for me.
Yeah. I actually hired 2 people that had been previously working 100% remote. And when I was interviewing them, I told them, I said, well, you do realize, you've been working remote. This is an in-office position. And they were like, oh, we are so ready to be around people. They had been working remotely for 3 years, and they were, both of them, and they're in different offices, but both of them were like, yeah, we're ready to be around people again. We're ready to function and feel like we're part of a team instead of feeling like we're isolated. And so it's, and I know there's people out there just crushing the remote, they have fake things that they do remotely for their people to show appreciation and stuff like that. But you just don't have that, like what I said, those teachable moments that happen when you're interacting with people, that you have when you have a team that they're all together.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. It elevates the learning curve. It elevates the collaboration.
Right.
You don't know that conversation exists
Yeah.
from somebody that's working remote.
Well, and understand that when we have 9 locations, in a way we are working remotely because we have 8 other locations that are not together. So we still have that task of how do you make everybody feel part of the whole. And so we do have, we have meetings every Wednesday morning at 9:00. Our phones shut down for an hour, and then we actually do Zoom calls. We actually have done that for probably almost 10 years. 10 years ago, it started just as a conference call. And then after that, we started going to, online video presence, to the point where when COVID happened and everybody figured out what Zoom was, we're like, yeah, we've been doing that for 3 or 4 years already. But we do a Zoom call with our entire staff. We break that down also, and we have another one on Tuesday afternoons just with our commercial team, where they get together and kind of talk about things that are changing in the market, training times, if they have somebody that needs to be trained on something a little bit more. Personal lines, we don't do it quite as often because that team's a lot bigger. But we do have a set time where if they need it, we can schedule that in after our first meeting on Wednesday. So just even trying to keep all of our locations connected is probably what other people that have all remote staff do all the time. But that's a challenge in itself, just to try to keep everybody connected together. But at least I know within their hubs, they have this group that they are with every day, and somebody's got their back, and they can have somebody they can ask a question to, and that kind of thing. So we'd really try to set up mentors when we bring somebody on, so they always have somebody they can call for help.
I'm going to put you on the spot here a little bit. With these 9 different locations, and we talked about your processes, how are you ensuring that these processes, procedures are being followed? Because as I learned, people don't always hear what you say,
right,
or read the manual, and in a something I have not done a great job on is spot checking. Just the random, just to make sure, some quality assurance.
right.
How do you make sure that people are doing things the right way?
Yeah, I would say probably one of the ways is with we have our phone system that records all the calls. And so I do listen to quite a few calls. I'll go in and make sure they're answering the phones the way I want them to be answered, that they're going in and they're attaching the phone calls, things like that. So I do listen to phone calls, and I will send an email and say, hey, make sure that when you do this on the phone that you're, wording it this way, stuff like that. The other thing I would say comes out of questions. If I have, like last week, I had a CSR that asked me a question that was dealing with walk-ins. And so I answered her question, and then I go in and I put it on the CSR sheet for our Wednesday meeting. And then I talk about it. And then what I did the last time is I went in and I started I cross-referenced phone calls with activities and AMS to see how it got assigned and whether it got assigned appropriately. I found out it hadn't gotten assigned appropriately. So I fixed it and then told that person, this is how we do it again. And then I also am going to talk about it again on our Wednesday meetings as far as how the account was assigned in our system and to an agent. So it is hard, but that's why we have those Wednesday meetings, because we have to constantly talk about the processes to know to make sure that we're all doing things the same way, because it is very difficult because everybody feels like they're in their own little world.
Yeah.
And so you have to go in and say, okay, are you processing it this way? Are you sending this out? Are you putting this note in there? Are you calling on day 3 on a claim, to make sure, you have to remind them constantly. And I create activities, customized activities in AMS. Like one of the things that we did was we created a day 3, like on our claims. When you get the claim submitted, we have a day 3 call, because I want the person called on day 3 to make sure they've been contacted by the company. Because the more longer they go without being contacted, the more angry they get. So if we can call them on day 3 and make sure they've been contacted, then that helps us save problems later on. So I created an activity in AMS called the day 3 call, day 3 claim call. So all I have to do is take the claim list. I can go into the system and I can see if that activity is there for day 3 claim call. And then I can just take the claim list and look at it for those calls. So creating customized activities helps, because if it's something I really want to monitor, that makes it easy for me to find. It makes it easy for them to document. They're on the phone, they're on the call. They just, while they're on the phone, they click the activity and say, this is the adjuster. It forces them to update the system with, this is the adjuster's name, things like that. So I have to make it easy for me to go in and find something. Otherwise, it's very overwhelming.
Yeah. Yeah. With 9 different locations and, a number of employees, how are you taking care of your team? What are some ways you're taking care of your team and making sure they're taken care of, checking in with them, checking their temperature,
Well,
you know,
I did
keeping them
launch a
happy?
new software this year called Motivosity. And what it basically is Jay and I talked about it, and I'm kind of that old school, do the do's and don't do the don'ts and everybody will be fine, just do your job.
Yeah.
But, the employees that you're getting in the next generation expect more feedback. They expect more, atta girl, atta boy, whatever. And I'm just not good at that. So I launched Motivosity because it's basically kind of an internal Facebook, which I'm like, oh my gosh, this is going to be the biggest time suck. But it really hasn't been. But what it does is it recognizes their birthdays. You just put every new person in there. And because you get so many people, I forget, I don't get them on my calendar and I totally forget about it. And then I feel bad that I'm sending something 2 days late. So that it comes up in that it recognizes the birthdays and I can attach money to that. It also recognizes their work anniversaries, which I was not recognizing at all before. And so that recognizes those. And the thing I've done is you can allocate every person to have $3 a month. And what they do is they acknowledge somebody. And maybe they only attach $1 to it, but it's not about the money. It's about them going in and acknowledging somebody, like, thank you to so-and-so for helping me, save this account last week. Or, I appreciate so-and-so taking this meeting when I had to be out sick last week and, making sure, whatever somebody helped them do, they go out and they acknowledge them. So, I have and it varies. I have anywhere from 45 to 70 acknowledgements a month, but that's 44 to 70 acknowledgements that I didn't do.
Yeah.
They're being recognized by their team. At the end of the year or whenever they want to, they can create it. They can take their dollars that they have for a gift card. And some of them have racked up, $150 in gift cards at one time, that they can, there's, anything you can think of that you can redeem them for. But it's that constant affirmation of thank you for helping me do this. Somebody that, we always do a big veterans collection at Christmas for the Veterans Hospital locally. And one of our staff members she works all year collecting this stuff. And she just brought this boatload of stuff. So we could take a picture of it, put it on there and say, thank you to this person for everything that, their commitment to the Veterans Project. And then everybody else goes in there and, kind of like Facebook where they clap or they, they like it or something like that. But it gives you that ability to recognize people. And the other thing you can do, I did my staff evaluation tool through there this year, where we created a list of, I think there were 17 different questions, and you can go through and have them. It doesn't take them that long to do, but the results are really, it's really great. It creates a graph for me, but then it also creates an individual report on the health of that person. And then I can go in and talk to that person about certain concerns or things that they would like to do, stuff like that. So it highlights that for me. I can do, just intermittent check-ins with them all through that. And then it'll give me that individual answer, but then it'll also put it together in a trend report for me. And I feel like with the generations that we're hiring, they need frequent check-ins. They need affirmation. They need to see positive things. They need to see support. So that's how I've done that for me. And it works well for me because that's it. Like I said, it's just something I'm not good at. And
Yeah. I think that's a great strategy. I've went to something, like that of being intentional about checking in with our team on a regular basis. My goal is to check in at least every other week with even if it's just a 15-minute conversation. It doesn't have to be about anything specific, doesn't have to be anything about work. And my goal is to kind of head off any problems,
right.
Or hear about them. Here's your chance to kind of bend my ear a little bit and tell me what's going on, what's working well, what's, this sort of thing. So,
the challenge for me has been, like I told you, I brought like 17 new people on last year.
Goodness.
And so
last year?
Yeah. And just
Wow.
in the last year. And so because of that, you bring one person on and then, man, the next week you're bringing somebody else on and you're on to the next person. I have to force myself to remember, hey, this person here's only been here 2 months, because I've hired 5 people since then, they're kind of like the veteran, but I have to go back and I have to check in and say, okay, how's it going? What training do you still feel like you're weak in? What do we need to shore up? What things are becoming more comfortable? What things are not? Because I always tell people that if they're not coming from the insurance industry, if we're actually starting somebody out new, I always tell them it's going to be a year before you feel like you're just not constantly questioning everything you're doing, because we're independent. We have so many different companies. Yeah. It takes a while to learn them all. And so I always tell them a year. Oh, well, then, here after 2 months, I'm thinking they're already, the veteran because I've hired 5 more people. And so I think this last year, the challenge for me has been to go back in and realize, oh, this person's only been here for this long. This person's only been here for this long. We did a lot of video this year as far as training. We created a video file. And if we had a process that we were teaching, we put it into video and then put it in that file, because some people need to see that repeated more than once to be able to do it. And so if we have that video in the file, then they can go back and look at that over and over and over again. So we've really tried to increase even just quoting, okay, here's how to quote a commercial BOP with Hartford, or here's how to do a traveler's auto or a traveler's homeowners, just to build that library so that we have that for training purposes.
First, the thought that came to my mind when you said you hired 17 people in the last year, you could have a monthly support group meeting with just your newbies for the first year, which would probably be super beneficial, because they can get together and say, what problem areas am I seeing? How do we do this? And it's probably a comfort that they can ask these questions to and not feel like, oh, I should know this.
Yeah, we actually did, because we had several young agents that were part of the sales force. We started doing, I call them Wednesday topicals, where we would just take an hour on Wednesday at 10 o'clock. And we just took all the new people and we basically taught a class on, like, the first time we talked about E&S markets. How is it different when you market something to an E&S market versus admitted? Because with the market the way it is, a lot more things are going ENS than ever
Yes.
used to before. So I said, you guys need to know that's different. Your information gathering, how you present it, it's all different. How you bill it out is different, things like
Yeah.
that. So we just did, and that one was like an hour and a half. It went really long, and I've recorded them all. But we did one of those. We did one just on new construction and general contractors and builders risk. That was one. That was probably our most awesome one so far. We did one on garage liability and dealerships. I mean, we're doing these topicals. And the cool part is we have all the new agents come on. And then we have a lot of the veteran agents that come on. And that's where the true learning comes in, is the veteran agents will give tips and tricks to the other ones. The commercial CSRs will be in there and say, here's the problem we have that you have to do. And so we have focused it towards our newer people, but yet it wouldn't work if we didn't have our veterans in there giving their advice. And I've been really excited about it because they have done, everybody's just kind of embraced it, on how to help people. And, and that way, if they want to develop a niche market or something for themselves, they have these tools of, and the, things to avoid and things to remember. So it's been really amazing. We've never really done that before until this year, but we did see a need, exactly like you said, where these new people, we needed to check in with them and say, okay, there's just so much to learn here. And there's so many of you that we can't just do it individually, but this is what we're going to do instead. So we'll probably continue the Wednesday topicals maybe over the next, maybe 4 to 6 weeks, and then kind of phase it out from there. But it's been really good.
It also creates probably a connection, to that veteran agent from maybe a newer agent that, maybe, if say she was speaking on a certain topic, and then you could have somebody reach out to, him or her and say, hey, could you tell me a little bit about this? I mean, that's just, it makes it easier. There's a connection there. There's a collaboration there. That's fantastic. Yeah. That's tell me a little bit about, you gave a great presentation a couple years ago at an innovation, a little bit about retention and being fired by your customer. Talk a little bit about your retention strategies.
Well, I think a lot of it is perception, how you perceive losing an account. When we started changing the verbiage from having a cancellation on an account to where, why did you get fired? It changes the course of the conversation totally. If I could send an email, when I see these come through, I can send an email and say, hey, what happened? Why did they leave? But now I send it to that agent and say, why did you get fired? It's personal. And they're like, I don't know, so then they go find out and they call back, and say, oh, well, this is what happened. And so then that's a strategy, that you have to develop. Okay, that if you got fired because of this, we need to develop a strategy so it doesn't happen again. I have CSRs and people that I have listened to phone calls, and they will be on the phone with the person that's leaving, and they'll say, well, and the person's like, why are you asking all these questions? And she's like, because Vonda's going to ask me why I got fired. And then the person feels bad. We're like, well, we're not firing you. And she goes, yes, you are. If you're leaving and not having me as your agent, you are firing me. And that's why she's going to ask me why I got fired. And I've had people that didn't leave because of that conversation. And so then it's like, it just changes the conversation so much. But a lot of people, it's easy to focus on the new business that you get in. But at what cost did that new business come? What did you lose? What was going out the back door? And so we really focus on the cancellations. We send a report out every Friday, and we scour that list. And that's where they know I am going to be emailing them on why they got fired. And so they are prepared with their answers. Or sometimes, in the beginning, it was like, oh my gosh, I don't know. Now they know. And they're being a lot more proactive about that. They're trying to save accounts. It's just a perception. And then there's the concept of having a good breakup. So we have a process where, if we can have a good breakup, then the possibility of getting that person back later is a lot higher. And we get people back because they go to these places, especially if they call it 800 number. And so it's like, you need to get a hold of their policy and find out what got stripped, because I can guarantee if they called that number, they don't have the coverage they had, with you. So I believe that your retention strategies have to focus on what's leaving out the back door. And because if you don't know why it's leaving out the back door, then it might be some bleeding you can stop. If there's something that is, maybe it's the same carrier. We have one carrier, their claim system is terrible. And so we have to micromanage that claim system when we have claims, because we know that if we don't, we will lose people just because of how they fail to handle claims well. And so those kind of paying attention to those kinds of things will affect your retention at the bottom line.
Which comes back to I think that's why your day 3 claim call is so smart, because we have not done a great job of that in our agency of really kind of, hand holding through a claim, which is very, very meaningful. In your example of somebody has a bad claim experience, well, sometimes we just all get lumped together. Mm-hmm. And that you didn't do enough for them, even though you may have no control of it whatsoever. But at least if you're involved, explaining, you were providing support for them. Again, to your point of, yes, you have a good breakup, there's a good chance you could get them back. We have gone to, over the last, say, 6 months, we just started it, of really working on our, on our files that we've lost in the last couple of years. And for the most part, we're very fortunate. We have a very good service team, and we don't usually lose people. Most of the time we lose people on price, and that's just is what it is. But prices are all over the place right now. So we're just calling people back saying, you're welcome back, and we'd love to see you. And I'm actually a little surprised at the response that we've gotten, because everybody wants to shop and there's a familiarity. So, you make it easy for them to leave, and there's a good chance that they'll come back.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about your technology. You're very, tech savvy. It's kind of an interest of yours. What kind of tech are you using that's been helpful for your agency?
Oh gosh, I love technology. It's really hard. I have to make sure that I have a very set tech stack, and I have 6 objectives that are on my tech stack, so that when I go to get a new tech, I have to put it through those objectives and make sure that I am putting it in for the right reason. Because in the very beginning, when things really started, for an insurance industry that never hardly changed in 50 years, it's been changing at the speed of light right now. And so you have to really be intentional on what it's going to do, and not feel like you just need to do that because somebody else is going to do it. And so I have my objectives, and I just added 2 years ago, I added another objective, which was security, because that's become an issue. Because sometimes some of the technology that we're putting in is because it adds a layer of security. And so that was something different, because, security technology doesn't really have an ROI. So you have to be careful there. You put it in there because it's the right thing to do. So that was my objective number 6 that I added. But anything that, I always look at it first and foremost of whether I can save somebody some time. And I look at, if you have a Venn diagram, where it's people, processes, and automation, what can I do to enhance my processes with technology so that my humans can be more efficient? Because I want my humans are the face to the customer. And so whatever technology, they still have to have those conversations with the customer, and that's probably the most important thing they can do. So what can I give them as tools so that they can take that time with the customer, and then I have the tools that will streamline everything in the back end. And so I think that's always been kind of my focus. We're doing a lot of experimenting with the artificial intelligence.
Mm.
You know, we're onboarding the one where it's doing the quoting, where it will move from, you know, it's a browser add-on, and it'll move your quoting from different company to different company,
Okay.
so that it'll streamline, you know, instead of having to instead of having to use a comparative rater that moves it from one thing to the other, that's not always very efficient. We're mapping it from one carrier to the other, so it doesn't really matter, you know, where you're going. It'll just see those fields and move it over, because that allows them to quote a lot more quotes in a shorter amount of time.
What is that
And
called?
it's called Gaia.
Okay. Oh, I've heard. Okay.
Yeah. And I'm working on an artificial intelligence. Well, I'm chat G2P for our working on a appetite guide, you know, that they can just go in and, you know, say, okay, who's going to take this or that or whatever. So I've got it set up. I'm testing the questions and kind of tweaking how it answers some of those questions. But I think a lot of those kinds of databases are going to really streamline for us for time.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of excited about that part of it. The fact that they just put the chat GTP, the OpenAI, you know, the app store, you know, that they're going to release, that is to me going to be game changing, to where you're going to have a lot more tools like that are, instead of me spending all this time programming it and developing it, it's going to be there where
Yeah.
we can, you know, share it. And so I'm very excited about that. But yeah, no, I think anything that can save them time, then is where I'm really going for. So
You have a big group, so this is kind of a blanket statement, but you know, what's the buy-in like for your new technology? Is it do you get a lot of, oh, here we go with Vonda again. She
yeah,
found a new tool and now we got to figure out how to use this.
yeah, I think that's part of the reason why I am trying to find something that I think will be a time saver. For instance, you know, I created a system for our certificates, and incorporated a VA with that. And, you know, I have CSRs that came up to me and says, you know, this is saving me 45 minutes a day.
Yeah.
And I think they know that the reason I'm doing it is because I want to help them be more efficient, and to be able to not spend as much time on mundane tasks. So I really haven't had a lot of pushback. The pushback comes if I make them do double entry, because then
Right.
I'm not saving them time.
No.
I am adding to their time, which doesn't make any sense at all. So I think that's
Right.
why I'm a lot more particular about if it doesn't integrate, or if it doesn't come from, can we put in this system and then it can flip flop to every place else. If it's just a standalone, then I'm not always as excited about it, because I can't add to their time period. So I think they know that I'm very very cognizant of that. So I haven't really had a lot of pushback. The other thing that I've done is, a lot of times, instead of just doing a whole, like, throw it out with everybody, I will pick 2 or 3 people to start it, and then they will see the benefit of it, and then people will see them. It's like, oh, I want to do that too.
Yeah.
And then I'll have them help roll it out. So it's just not
Good
necessarily
idea.
coming from me. That works really well with the Salesforce. I haven't decided if it's just because I'm female or what, but I, you know, it's like, I'll give them an idea, and it's just like, okay, somehow I have to make it sound like it's their idea, and then, you know, then they're really excited about it. So it's easier a lot to do that with CSRs than sometimes with the Salesforce. I have to be more creative in letting them think it's their idea. So
Well, and then you can help those few that you've trained, and you can help them. They can help train the rest of
exactly.
them too. That's
Right.
God, that's
Yep.
brilliant. I don't want to keep you all day here, but this has been fantastic. A lot of good information. Last question for you: what would you like to see the agency improve on in 2024 here? What would you like to get better at?
Oh, personally, for me, I think having trained so many people this year, it showed gaps in. That's why we started moving to more video. because it exposed gaps in our training, especially if they were training in a different branch. If they're training here in this branch, it's a lot easier than if they train them in a branch. But that just means I have to have all the processes nailed down a lot tighter. So I think having a better move from this to this to this to this on the training, we've got the components. They're just not always easy to figure out how to get through them. Yeah. And so one of the things that I really think is a weakness is getting better at those, putting those components in an easier, accessible system.
Yeah, we've went to, it's somewhat of a intranet of which we just built out here, which is just somewhere to house, all of our information, our manuals, our training, and company contacts, that sort of thing. It's very helpful. It still could be a little bit better organized, but that was extremely helpful for us. Is just as I've onboarded 2 people myself last year, and to say this is where a good portion of the training is. Here's where it's found. Here's our library of videos. Very easy, well indexed. To find information. Yeah, that's a good one.
See, we have it as a Google Drive because we've had it that way for probably 10 years. It's just getting so large that we have to go in and kind of tame it a little bit. Yeah. And so we've talked about the intranet also. I don't know. I also created a chat bot called Ask Willie for Willie the Wildcat that has like just our employee manual and stuff like that. So simple things like, I forgot, how do I order office supplies, or something like that they can go in and type that. I haven't launched it yet. I've still been loading documents on it, and then I kind of got waylaid over the holidays, but that was part of that. But, in order to just have a place where they could go ask questions like that. And I really saw a need for that. And so I just, I tested it with a couple of people, and it's like, okay, I need to load different documents because they're asking different questions from when I thought I could predict kind of the questions they were asking. And then it turns out that they had a lot of other questions. So I've had to go in and try to load more documents and figure out how to get it to pin back to a certain document. So I'm kind of in my second development stage where I tried it, figured out some of the weaknesses, and now I got to go back and fix it. So
yeah, impressive. I couldn't begin to that. Yeah, it's great. Vonda, thank you very much for your time. Sorry, I kept you a little long here today. This has been great. A lot of great information that we can all use. I can see you hiring 17 people last year. You have your hands full. You need another.
Insane. It was a chaotic year. It was insane. I don't want to ever have another year like that again. I had some weird things happen that caused me to have to do some hiring, and it was stressful. It was probably my least favorite year that I've had for a long time. So it was a lot, but I feel good. I feel like we're in a really good place right now. So I have maybe 2 people that I would like to hire in the next maybe 4 months, maybe. To maybe build out a little bit more, but I finally feel really good about the depth of the team. So it was all worth it. But I will say there's probably times I cried in my office a lot more last year than ever before. So
well, 2 people, that's nothing. I mean, it's nothing for you.
A piece of cake.
Well, best of luck with everything this year.
All right.
Everyone else, thank you for listening to another episode of the Agents to Owners podcast. We'll see you next week.